I've been thinking a lot about the Batman. It was awesome to finally get a Batman movie that dives deep into the detective aspect of the character, with scenes that take their time and drench you in their atmosphere. Robert Pattinson, I never doubted him for a second. He very well may be my favorite live-action Batman. Now, this isn't going to be a review of the Batman movie, but needless to say, I loved it. So much so that I really want a movie tie-in game for the Batman. And people have told me, but Diego, we literally have Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and Arkham Origins. Nah. See, you're missing the point. Those games are too good. I'm asking for a mediocre movie tie-in game. I want a half-baked combat system, unresponsive controls, a wonky camera, and the actors to be contractually obligated to voice their respective characters, therefore giving exactly 0% to their performances. I think there might be something wrong with me. Unfortunately, or fortunately if you're a sane person, movie tie-in games are a thing of the past, so I had to rummage through my box of old PS2 games and settle for the next best thing, and that's Batman Begins for the PS2. But before I go any further, I want to take a quick minute to talk to you about one of my favorite apps, GG. And no, this isn't a sponsor, I just really like the app and I want more followers on it. GG is essentially Letterboxd for video games. You can write and share reviews, let your friends know what games you're playing or are looking forward to playing, make lists of the games you've beaten, or ranked list. Here's my list of Batman games ranked from worst to best. So come on! I only have like 30 followers on this thing, and if the Riddler can get over 500 on his creepy Twitter for serial killers thing, I should be able to have more. Follow me on GG, please. Now, back to it. Batman Begins was released in June 14th, 2005, exactly one day before the movie, and man, what a way to torture hardcore Batman fans. Imagine eagerly anticipating the movie and the video game. I grabbed the game a day before the movie comes out and I'm sweating at the palms, itching to play it. But I don't want the movie spoiled for me. What do? Easy. I get the official novelization of Batman Begins, cause I can't read. Batman Begins was developed by Eurocom and published by EA. And what we have here is a linear stealth action game that's fallen into the ever-growing pool of comic book games that are often recalled as just being meh. But I have some fond memories of this game. I remember reading a Game Informer article that painted the game as being more than just another shameless cash grab. The developers seemed to have some ambitious ideas that pushed the console's technical capabilities. One of them being a brand new fear system that would allow you to manipulate thugs and gain the upper hand in combat encounters. With interesting ideas and a strong backing from the film studio, this gave the game a prestigious aura that made me feel like I shouldn't just dismiss it as another generic action game. Now, almost 2 decades later and a plethora of Dark Knight games later, I'm curious to see how Batman Begins holds up and whether or not the team delivered on those promises. Let's start with what I consider to be the best part of Batman Begins, its presentation. This game is astonishingly beautiful. I was not prepared to be blown away with how graphically impressive Batman Begins holds up. Interior environments are dense with detail, lighting is realistic and atmospheric, with light sources piercing through windows and wall panels. Skyboxes are expansive and hide their cutoff point really well. The faces, look at these faces! We've all seen the monstrosities that often come out of these games when trying to capture actors' likeness, but these are some of the best I've ever seen, even when compared to games from the following generation. They don't just look good, but they're also animated really well. Expressions are exaggerated enough that they clearly convey the character's emotions without teetering too far into the realm of looking cartoony. I love how the look of the film is perfectly and consistently captured throughout the entire runtime of the game. Much how the color red is synonymous with Matt Reeves' The Batman, Batman Begins adapts the color orange. It's in all of its promotional material, the way scenes are color corrected. Adapting a color palette for a movie or video game is a surefire way to give it a distinct visual identity. I've seen a lot of people criticize games like Deus Ex Human Revolution and Resident Evil 5, saying that those games have a limited color palette and that it makes the game look bland. I don't agree with that at all. The limited color palette is intentional and it's meant to convey a certain tone or, again, stylistic choice to make the game stand out. The Batman Begins video game translated the look of the film flawlessly. I can't praise this game's visuals enough. It's up there with the likes of Metal Gear Solid 3 and Silent Hill 2. Music and sound design is usually something I don't discuss in video games or media in general, cause I'm not all that knowledgeable on the topic and don't feel comfortable critiquing it. But here, it cannot go without mention. The eerie music combined with the sound of Batman's footsteps echoing as he prowls through dingy hallways makes for an absolute, and I'm sure you've never heard this one before,
atmospheric experience.
One thing I can say with full-blown confidence is that I think Bale gives his best Bat voice here.
What's the chemical? I don't know. I swear to God. Swear to me. Where is Crane?
It has the right balance of gargling just the right amount of marbles instead of the whole sack. It's threatening enough while still being clear enough to understand what he's saying without the need for subtitles. I think most of the cast does a commendable job here. I mean, sure, Michael Caine sounds bored out of his mind and like he'd rather be reprising his role as Nigel Powers most of the time, but to be fair, who wouldn't?
I've got a better idea. Why don't you rescue me in about, 7 or 8 minutes?
But no one ever stood out to me as being egregiously bad.
Please! I swear, I don't know anything!
You don't want to end up like the other doctors, do you?
No!
I take that back. The only cast member that doesn't return for the video game is Gary Oldman, for he was gearing up for the role of a lifetime as Ignitus in The Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning. When it comes to adapting the plot of the movie, Batman Begins might be the most faithful video game adaptation I've ever played. Besides having maybe 2 environments that don't appear in the movie, the game does not dare stray too far away from the source material, so you won't find any extra villains from the comics, which is a real shame, cause I would have loved to have seen the Nolanification of characters like Killer Croc, perhaps making him a crazy cannibal with a skin condition who's isolated himself in the sewers of Gotham, Poison Ivy, seductive vixen that kills you with deadly plant toxins, then shoves a cactus up your ass. But no, all we get is Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul like the movie pronounces it, and Scarecrow. To give the game some credit, it does make better use of Victor's ass. It would be a stretch calling these confrontations boss fights though. Villains are treated like normal goons, just with more hit points. More on combat later. Bruce Wayne's time in the League of Shadows is masterfully implemented as the game's tutorial. That's a no-brainer. But like I said before, the game barely deviates from the movie's plot, so key moments like Batman confronting Falcone at the docks are exhaustingly stretched out in levels that last like an hour, as Batman meticulously platforms his way through several interior environments. Now, I know this is Batman Begins, so Bruce might not have the kinks of being the Dark Knight worked out just yet, but seeing him take the longest possible route to his target makes him look like a glorified burglar, even though he still has his grappling hook and cape to glide with. He should be able to make his way up to a high vantage point to bypass all of these impeding obstacles and easily get to the other side of the docks. Instead, get ready to climb fences, poles, and ladders. Why? Why am I climbing stuff? I have my fancy rope gun. Despite the nerfing of Batman's capabilities here, navigating through these levels is easily my favorite part of this game. I really wanted to make it through this video without drawing comparisons to the Arkham games, but whoops! After playing those games so many times, I got used to a Batman that is very able-bodied to say the least. The way you can gracefully and easily glide through just about any environment, the way there always seems to be a grappling point in reach, so covering long distances in mere seconds in those games is never an issue. Batman is incredibly overpowered in those games, and feels like that legend the criminals of Gotham fear. Contrast that with the Cape Crusader in this game, where he has to use batarangs to knock down chain link fences and climb on them to reach higher levels, and balance himself on steel beams. It's refreshing to play as a Batman that's more grounded. And I don't mean in a sense that he lives in a realistic world devoid of fantastical and supernatural elements, but that he's more hands-on and has to be more crafty about traversing these environments. It makes him feel more like just a guy in a costume, rather than this super elite perfect man that has a button for any given situation. Batman Begins is a platformer more than anything, and I like platforming video games. We didn't get enough superhero platformers during the 6th generation, and Batman Begins is a damn good one at that, because Batman feels good to control. It goes completely against the realism established in this universe, but there's a tight double jump that makes hopping around environments a breeze.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
Batman himself feels like he has some heft to him when running around. There's a brief wind-up to his run cycle that makes him feel like an actual body with weight, instead of a bunch of pixels. I might be in the minority here, but ever since I played GTA 4, I love when characters feel heavy. It feels like the stakes are higher when jumping over a gap, and like you'll hit the ground that much more harder if you don't make it. I wish Batman Begins would double down on platforming and stealth and keep combat to a minimum, because the combat mechanics here, they just suck. It does a thing where whenever you engage an enemy, the camera shifts to a 3D fighting game perspective, which goes against the way these encounters are designed. You're often going up against a group of enemies, and this one-on-one style system clashes with that. You can easily bounce between enemies, but there's really no need to, because enemies will wait around while you beat up on their fellow co-workers. Having this Tekken-style perspective would have been a good opportunity to adapt some of the intricacies found in a game like that. Things like complex combos that would break through enemies' defenses, having to read specific enemy animations to successfully dodge or counter them. Instead, you get stuff like this. On-screen prompts that leave no room for player experimentation. If you want to perform an attack that can break an enemy's block or attack multiple enemies at once, there's no special input you need to learn, just mindlessly follow the big pretty button on screen when the game presents you with it. This simple and boring approach to combat is made even worse when basic attacks lack satisfying feedback and impact. It doesn't help that fights last way too long either. Enemies constantly fall over, forcing you to stand around and wait for them to get back up so you can continue kicking them in the pants. The way Batman moves and feels when he's engaged in combat is totally different from the moment-to-moment explorative and platforming gameplay. He feels weightless and jittery, the way he sporadically spins his legs around and somersaults over enemies, and not in a way where you get the impression that, whoa, this guy's a super agile ninja, but more in a way that he feels like a completely different character and changes his body's density. I would have rather this game keep combat to a minimum and instead have the players silently take out enemies from the shadows, affecting other guards when they realize that their partners are disappearing one by one. Kinda sounds like the ambitious fear system that was deemed too advanced to pull off an inferior technology.
There's a reason that no one's ever tried this before, and it's because it's incredibly complex and the animation and art demands are huge.
Fear is a strong theme in Batman Begins, so the team at Eurocom developed a gameplay mechanic that gave players an interactive representation of said theme. Imagine a dynamic enemy AI that responds to sounds, movements, and general disruptions in their vicinity, thus changing their patrol patterns, luring them into Batman's traps, and making them less efficient at their jobs. The city of Gotham is a sandbox, and you have a utility belt full of all kinds of toys. Imagine all the different ways you can mess with thugs and how you might change their behavior. There would be limitless outcomes to every encounter. That's not at all what the fear system is here. Instead, it's the equivalent of flipping a switch on a wall to open a locked door so you can progress through the level. Let me explain. Many times throughout your playthrough, you'll encounter a room with a group of bad guys, and some of them may be armed with automatic weapons. Now, you have to get to the other side of the room, but there's no way to sneak around the bad guys. Despite having Kevlar armor, Batman can't take more than a few gunshots. A head-on approach is not an option, at least not yet. This is where striking fear into the heart of enemies comes into play. There will be a very clearly marked target in the environment, one that you will throw a batarang at. This will cause things like barrels to explode or scaffoldings to fall over, startling enemies, causing them to drop their guns, and just completely forget about them and refuse to simply pick them back up. Now's your chance to jump in and take out the evildoers with this game's incredibly shallow combat system. I like the idea of having to lower enemies' defenses when there's no other choice but to face them head on. The Arkham games would go on to adapt this idea too. But the problem is that every encounter ends up playing out the same way. You will always be forced to throw your batarang at the obviously marked chandelier or barrels to frighten your enemies and make them vulnerable, despite having a utility belt filled with other gadgets like smoke bombs, flash grenades, and a sonic bat beacon. Why can't I strategically throw a smoke bomb to the enemy that poses the biggest threat and take him out first? Or throw a batarang at a steel pipe on the wall to lure him away from the group and take him out inconspicuously? I can only ever use my gadgets when the bad guys have already been startled and I'm engaged in combat. Regardless, they all serve the same purpose. Using gadgets will cause enemies to be in a vulnerable state that leaves them open to attacks. No matter which gadget you use, the effect is identical. There's absolutely zero player agency. If you put 4 players sitting side by side playing the same section of the game, they will have the same exact experience. I don't see what's so ambitious about this fear system. The frightened enemy facial animations are impressive and causing environmental destruction is fun, but there's nothing dynamic about it. You're essentially triggering a cutscene that will then open up the next phase of this enemy encounter. Outside of combat, there are 2 other gadgets that you consistently use throughout the game. Batman's lockpick, which takes you to the laziest lockpicking minigame I've ever experienced. You are to line up shapes into identically shaped slots as they rotate 3 times sequentially. It is always the same 3 shapes, the same rotating motion, and the same rotating speed. My favorite use of Batman's gadgets is this little hacking gizmo. I forget what it's called. 90% of the time you use it, it starts up this simple hacking minigame. But there are other instances where it's used to open up this picture-in-picture window. Here you can view the environment from the perspective of a surveillance camera. And in this perspective, you can see traps placed in the environments like lasers and pressure-sensitive floor panels. This was a cool twist on the already fun platforming gameplay baked into the game. I wish the game had more of these, but I think there are only 2 or 3 at most. Batman Begins often gets compared to the Splinter Cell games of the time, and I think that's being a bit generous. Sure, I can see the parallels, the way you can crouch, shimmy on pipes, and skulk around guards. The optic cable, which, by the way, is completely useless. Why would I waste my time using this tiny camera to see what's on the other side of a door when I have a radar that clearly marks enemies? Splinter Cell actually has the things I wish the fear system had. Guards react to sound, and when they catch glimpses of Sam Fisher whenever he steps out of the shadows. As Sam Fisher, you have to create shadows by shooting light bulbs in the environment. This would have easily translated into a Batman game by utilizing his batarangs to do the exact same thing. But in a game like Splinter Cell or even Metal Gear Solid, where the game is made harder when enemies are suspicious to your presence, in Batman Begins, guards should be less effective, becoming panicked and paranoid, maybe by hallucinating shadowy figures, drawing attention away from the actual Batman and giving him the upper hand. Batman Begins does have a mechanic where scaring an enemy does weaken them. You can see a little window here that shows your opponent's heart rate, and the higher it is, the less often they block and take more damage. But it's really superficial and you can't really experiment with it. Interrogations would have been another interesting way to play around with the idea of fear. You can interrogate enemies in this game, but it's simply done by making sure you leave one guy conscious after a big fight, grabbing him and simply pressing a button. What if instead they did the antithesis of the interrogation mechanic found in the Punisher game? Side note, the Punisher on PS2 rules. But where Punisher is all up in your face and violent when trying to get info out of the goons, Batman would be more methodical about scaring his enemies. You would have to gradually ramp up the fear factor by, again, making noises, hiding in the shadows, and giving enemies glimpses of yourself, uplifting this myth of the bat creature that lives in the shadows. Whereas if you simply walk up to a guy in a room with good lighting, he'll see that you're just a guy in a costume and isn't threatened by you. Then again, a nut job in a bat costume is pretty scary. Everyone loves a Batmobile section, right? Not me. If the bulk of this game is a poor man's Splinter Cell, then the Batmobile levels are a homeless man's Burnout 3 takedown. These suck, dude. I didn't get any enjoyment out of them. They're not hard, which is a good thing. The tumbler itself controls pretty tightly. Actually, at times it feels like it's driving itself, especially when going around corners. Was that intentional? Like, is it representing a smart onboard system that can make the car drive itself? I doubt it. They probably wanted to keep frustrations to a minimum when the camera completely cuts away from the Batmobile to show you a money shot of the helpless civilian Batman is murdering. Yeah, I know, that joke is done to death. I feel like EA forced these Batmobile sections into the game because Burnout 3 was such a success that they wanted to capitalize on these crash mechanics. But it's just not as fun in this game, it's very derivative. It goes without saying that Arkham Asylum owes a lot to Batman Begins. This game laid out the foundation of the many engaging game mechanics in Rocksteady's franchise. So I just want to put that out there. I feel like I started getting really negative about this game toward the end of this video. But I really do like it. It's a good game, just mechanically simple. It's in every sense of the term an interactive experience. Like, yeah, that's what video games are, but this one especially. Like, I'm just doing the thing the TV screen is telling me to do. You know, like press circle, throw the batarang at the thing, and climb this specific pole. I mean, the game did its job. It adapted Batman Begins into an interactive video game. It's just not letting me make any decisions. But again, I do like it. I think.